Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. How is this even possible? Chen Hichan gasped, his mind spinning. The three divine abilities which had just been unleashed were powerful trump cards, any one of which should have been fully capable of inflicting grievous injuries on someone in the early Diva realm. Because of how seriously they viewed Bai Xiaochun, they hadn't hesitated to join forces and unleash such high-level techniques. The fact that Bai Xiaochun had killed Patriarch Starry River was only secondary as far as they were concerned. What was more shocking was how afterward, he used one magical technique after another to fight back against them. Bai Xiaochun was flabbergasted and at the same time, had a very bad feeling. Li Shundao was reacting similarly and realized that, although he had accepted from the beginning that this enemy was powerful, he had actually completely underestimated him. Damn it, this guy isn't an Earth Dao diva. That was what all three devas were thinking. However, there was no time for thought or planning. The enormous face of Bai Xiaochun which filled the heavens had already driven away their will, and was now causing immense pressure to weigh down on them. They began to fall back, madness gripping their hearts. By this point, Bai Xiaochun had come to realize that his will had driven away the wills of the other devas, and was causing pressure to weigh down on them. After his breakthrough, he had sensed himself fusing with heaven and earth. However, in the urgency of the moment, he had been able to do little more than fight back against his opponents. But now, as his energy surged, and his face filled the sky, he finally felt what it was like to be a diva. Devas could completely fuse with heaven and earth, whereupon their every action would draw upon the power that existed in creation around them. A single breath could absorb spiritual power from vast distances. In fact, it would be very difficult for someone in the diva realm to actually run out of spiritual power under ordinary circumstances. It was for that reason that some trump cards which required vast amounts of spiritual power could actually be used over and over again in quick succession by devas. For example, Bai Xiaochun's Water Swamp Kingdom. In the past, it had been difficult for him to use that technique twice in a row, but now, things were very different. And yet, that was of secondary importance. More importantly, he could fuse with heaven and earth, effectively becoming the will of the heavens. His thoughts became the thoughts of the heavens. If he wished to punish his enemies, then the heavens wished to punish them as well. That was the highest realm that devas could reach. Diva shapes heavenly will. Rumbling sounds echoed out as Bai Xiaochun's face grew larger, thunder rumbled, and the ground quaked in all directions. The faces of the three devas flickered as sensations of profound crisis filled their hearts. Yet again, they fell back. However, they were in the mid-diva realm, and had been devas for many years. They had extensive experience in combat, and thus were able to suppress their fear, and use their moment of retreat to perform incantation gestures, unleashing divine abilities with incredible speed. Blood qi erupted from Chen Hichan, transforming into an enormous blood-colored giant, who wielded a long, blood-red spear. Howling, the giant charged straight toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was just as fast in his actions. Clouds roiled out from his hands, becoming a 9-story pagoda that crushed downward toward Bai Xiaochun. The strangest technique of all belonged to Li Shundao. When he extended his right hand, a sword appeared in it, and at the same time, his eyes suddenly went blank, as if he were unconscious. However, he suddenly accelerated with blinding speed, becoming a beam of sword light that stabbed toward Bai Xiaochun. The attacks of the three devas shook heaven and earth, and left everyone in the river-defying sect reeling in fear and anxiety. Many of them even began to pray in their hearts. It was almost too much for many people to process mentally. However, only enough time had passed for a spark to fly off of a piece of flint. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun's eyes flashed, and his energy surged. He took a step forward, simultaneously clenching his hand into a fist. All creation shook as a black hole appeared. That black hole seemed to suck in all of Bai Xiaochun's fleshly body power, and all of his life force. Although he didn't look any different physically, he felt like he was being torn apart inside. In the blink of an eye, everything about him was gone. At the same time, the enormous face up in the sky grew dim and difficult to see. The only thing of him left behind was the fist inside of that vortex. As soon as the fist appeared, the faces of the three devas fell, and a sensation of imminent peril rose up in them that surpassed anything from before. What divine ability is that? What terrifying pressure! Despite their terror, they hadn't reached the point where they felt helpless. In fact, their abundant experience in battle was telling them that they absolutely could not flee. If they did, they would be crushed out of existence. The only chance they had was to break this attack, and thus, their enemy's momentum. If they didn't, his will would grow stronger. Die! Chen Hichan shouted. Unexpectedly, he merged into the blood-colored giant, hefted the spear in its hand, and stabbed it with more urgency toward Bai Xiaochun. The 9-story cloud pagoda accelerated, and as for Li Shendao, he appeared right in front of Bai Xiaochun, his sword stabbing directly toward his forehead. However, even as the 3 counter-attacks closed in, Bai Xiaochun looked up, and an enormous, shadowy being materialized behind him. It was a man in imperial robes, with an imperial crown, face completely expressionless, and yet, resembling Bai Xiaochun in every way. There was an incomparably domineering air to him. This was none other than the manifestation of the Undying Emperor's fist. When that domineering, shadowy emperor appeared, Bai Xiaochun unleashed his fist strike. Heaven shook and the earth trembled. Furthermore, since Bai Xiaochun was merged with all creation, becoming the will of the heavens, the pressure of a destructive heavenly punishment appeared. Now that he had mastered his undying bones, he was able to easily unleash this peak level of fleshly body power. It was a quintuple power Undying Emperor's fist. It was a supreme level of destructive power, causing the air to ripple and distort. The gigantic, shadowy emperor fused into Bai Xiaochun's fist, which, despite not growing any larger, shot toward the 3 devas, accompanied by intense rumbling sounds. We can't stand up to this. Chen Hichan blurted. That was what his instincts were telling him. And that was when Bai Xiaochun's Undying Emperor's fist slammed into Li Shendao. The sky shuddered, and a tremor passed through Li Shendao. Then, a massive stream of blood sprayed out of his mouth. His sword shattered, and he was sent tumbling backward like a kite with its string cut, as surely as if a huge mountain had slammed into him. In fact, he couldn't even stop the blood from erupting from inside of him. Terror consumed him. His fleshly body was on the verge of falling apart, and his cultivation base was being dramatically destabilized as roughly 30% of the chi passageways inside of him were destroyed. Impossible, he shrieked. And yet, even as he fell back, the Undying Emperor's fist continued on without pause toward Chen Hichan, who was embodied as an enormous blood-colored giant. First, the blood-red spear shattered, and then the giant's body exploded. Chen Hichan himself appeared, blood spraying out of his mouth as he was flung backward, a look of blank shock on his face. Last was Bai Xiaochun. As soon as his 9-story cloud pagoda was hit by the Undying Emperor's fist, it shattered layer by layer. Bai Xiaochun himself escaped narrowly, and yet, still ended up coughing up blood. Face ashen and filled with disbelief and alarm, he staggered backward, aura in shambles. The Undying Emperor's fist was currently the most powerful divine ability at Bai Xiaochun's disposal. Especially the quintuple strength version. After all, even back when he wasn't a diva, he could still use it to fight with someone in the mid-diva realm. Now, he was in the early diva realm, and although he had not yet stabilized his cultivation base completely, he could still fuse with heaven and earth. Furthermore, he was a rare heaven Dao diva, which in itself made up for many of the weaknesses caused by not having a chance to stabilize his place within the realm. As such, he had just unleashed what was essentially a perfect attack. With it, he completely blasted away 3 devas. Of course, these were not ordinary devas, and they had been working together. Although they had been grievously wounded, they had not yet reached the point where they couldn't keep fighting. However, the shocking attack they had just sustained didn't just wound them physically, it was a severe blow to their courage. The drastic phenomena caused by the fist strike caused everyone in the river-defying sect to be shaken to the core, regardless of their rank in the sect. The shockwave from the attack was still spreading out, and yet, things weren't over yet. Even as blood sprayed out of the mouths of the 3 devas, and they fell back in terror, Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered. Although he didn't look any different from before, the truth was that he had been significantly drained in terms of fleshly body power. He hadn't been completely emptied out, but was vastly weaker. And yet, no one would be able to discern that from his facial expression. He had no special plan in mind, and yet, took another step forward. As he did, his cultivation base surged, and his will strengthened. The enormous face in the sky above grew clear, and seemed to radiate the energy of the Undying Emperor's fist, causing the lands below to quake violently. Then, Bai Xiaochun's foot landed, and he growled, "The river-defying sect is not the type of place that you can visit uninvited, and then leave without permission." The same words roared out from the mouth of the face up in the sky, making Bai Xiaochun seem dramatically impressive to everyone watching. Except for Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Xiaochun, whose eyes suddenly glittered. Something's off here. What's the point of being so wordy in the middle of a fight? Wait, don't tell me that he's actually out of power because of that fist strike? Is he trying to get us to retreat? The 3 divas' spirits lifted. Without hesitation, they all spun in place, transforming into flashes of light that, instead of fleeing, shot directly backward toward Bai Xiaochun. Their energy surged as they prepared powerful attacks. Although they were still being cautious, they were not holding back in terms of deadliness. However, in almost the same moment as they began to speed back toward Bai Xiaochun, he smiled. And as soon as the devas saw that smile, their hearts lurched in their chests. Not good, damn it, he tricked us. Suddenly, a mark appeared on Bai Xiaochun's forehead, which opened up into a third eye. The power of his heaven-span Dharma eye erupted out, sending violet light shooting toward the three devas. Before they could react, the light surrounded them, making them feel as if a huge, invisible hand had grabbed them. Simultaneously, Bai Xiaochun performed an incantation gesture with both hands and then waved them out in front of himself. Frigid domain. Rumbling sounds could be heard as indescribably cold air erupted out from Bai Xiaochun. Everything in the area began to freeze over, and at the same time, 27 frigid projections materialized. Each of the 27 projections looked exactly like Bai Xiaochun, and as soon as they appeared, they pounced on the three devas. From the murderous aura which surrounded the projections, it was easy to imagine what would happen if they reached them. Although they wouldn't be killed, they would definitely suffer grievous fleshly body injuries. Now was not the time for the devas to ponder the situation. Thunderous rumbling sounds erupted from Chen Hichan as he drew upon a secret magic that caused 3 rifts to open up on his face. Bone was visible beneath those rifts, and after they were fully open, Chen Hichan was suddenly given access to immense power. He struggled mightily against the power of the heaven-span Dharma eye, and then suddenly shot backward 3,000 meters, placing him a safe distance from any of the frigid projections. Only he knew the true price he had just paid to evade that attack. The 3 rifts which had been sliced open onto his face reduced his longevity by at least a 60-year cycle, and also dropped his cultivation base by roughly half a realm. It caused his heart to drip with figurative blood, and yet, he had no other options. In fact, he wasn't the only one to make such a decisive, drastic decision. Bai Xiaochun and Li Shundao both used similar secret magics, and paid extremely heavy prices to retreat from the frigid projections. As a result of their quick retreats, the frigid projections pounced on nothing but thin air, and then faded away into nothing. Although they had seemed impressive and dangerous earlier, the truth was that they weren't backed by very much power. That caused extremely unsightly expressions to appear on the faces of Chen Hichan, Li Shundao and Bai Xiaochun. However, as of this point, they already weren't willing to trust their senses. Originally, they had taken Bai Xiaochun to be strong in appearance only, which was why they had attacked. Although he had counter-attacked with what was essentially a feint, they were now too unnerved and hesitant to try again. The threat of Bai Xiaochun's undying emperor's fist was simply too great, and they currently had no way of assessing his true strength. Even as they hesitated, Bai Xiaochun stuck his chin up, waved his sleeve, and looked at them with cold, domineering eyes. Chen Hichan, eccentric Bai, and you, third guy who I don't know. Do you want to fight, or not? If not, then screw the hell off. As his voice echoed like thunder, the cultivators of the river-defying sect looked up with looks of profound excitement. The 3 devas had very unsightly expressions on their faces, and had hearts filled with anxiousness. On the one hand, they feared escalating the fight, but on the other hand, didn't want to back down. It was in that very moment of hesitation that the 3 devas suddenly looked up. There, off in the distance, the clouds churned as numerous beams of light appeared. Within moments, a massive formation of troops became visible. One figure after another shot out into the open. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Soon, it was fully 100,000. Battle cries filled the air, making it clear that a shocking army was incoming. It was none other than Bai Lin, Zhao Tianzhao, Patriarch Steel Veins, and the armies of the 5 legions. Who dares to harm one of my major generals? The Hall of Steel Veins campaigned for years at the Great Wall. Now that one of my major generals is back, who dares to cause him grief? You've pushed things too far, Patriarch. Master. As the voices rang out, the newcomers suddenly caught sight of the battlefield, and their eyes went wide with disbelief. Those who had cultivation bases at the level of Bai Lin or higher could sense the lingering fluctuations that would result from the death of a diva's nascent divinity. And those who could not sense such things could see the shattered fleshly body of Patriarch Starry River, as well as his severed head. Even more shocking was the current state of Bai Xiaochun and the other 3 devas. Bai Xiaochun hovered there in the air looking completely domineering and arrogant, facing Chen Hichan, Li Shundao and Bai Xiaochun, all of whom had blood dripping down their faces, and were clearly weakened and in very bad shape. Furthermore, it was obvious that the 3 devas had been working together, and yet weren't a match for Bai Xiaochun. Everyone, Bai Lin included, was left gasping in shock. Most taken aback of all was Patriarch Steel Veins. He struck fear into the hearts of 3 devas, he thought. He actually injured all of them. His eyes flickered in a way that no one would be able to detect. As a powerful diva expert, he was able to clearly sense the evidence of the deaths of Patriarch Starry River and Patriarch Dao River. Furthermore, he could easily see how badly wounded the 3 devas were, as well as the evidence of how the fight had ended. They just used secret magics. This Bai Xiaochun actually forced Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Zhenchen to use dangerous escape magics. Silence reigned on the battlefield. The cultivators from the Hall of Steel Veins were all staring blankly at Bai Xiaochun, their hearts battered by waves of shock. As for Bai Lin and Zhao Tianzhao, it looked like their eyes might pop out of their skulls at any moment. Down below, the numerous cultivators of the river-defying sect were bubbling with excitement at how valiant Bai Xiaochun had been in defeating Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Zhenchen. The 3 defeated devas' expressions flickered. Not only were they in very bad shape after their fight, there were plenty of fellow sect cultivators who had witnessed the affair. It was a big loss of face and a huge embarrassment. And yet, they were truly in fear of Bai Xiaochun's strength. At the same time, the 3 devas were relieved that the Hall of Steel Veins forces had arrived. If you ride a tiger, it's hard to get off, but now they had the perfect opportunity and excuse to retreat. Bai Xiaochun hovered there, feeling very pleased at the exclamations he had heard from Zhao Tianzhao, Bai Lin, and everyone else. Looking over, he could see that the 3 devas wished to withdraw. After blinking a few times, he kept his exhaustion hidden and unleashed some cultivation base power. Chen Hichan and you other 2. You really pushed things too far. I, Bai Xiaochun, have performed great services for the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. I've shed blood for it. I slaughtered countless enemies at the Great Wall, and yet, you tried to exterminate my sect. Nobody could stand for such a thing. You owe me some compensation. If you don't kowtow immediately an apology, and swear an oath to stay out of the way of all river-defying sect disciples in the future, then this matter will not be over. Even if you escape, I'll track you down and fight my way into your clans. He emphasized his words with the flick of a sleeve. After all, he had justice on his side. When Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Zhenchen heard his words, they very nearly coughed up more mouthfuls of blood. Bai Xiaochun's words were biting to the extreme. Earlier, he had simply told them to either fight or screw off, but now that he had some friends to back him up, he was acting even more extravagantly. Not only was he demanding compensation, he was also forcing them to lose face publicly. Don't go overboard, Bai Xiaochun. Li Shendao growled, his eyes completely bloodshot. After all, he had just worked very hard to extricate himself from this situation, and now that easy exit was being removed. That was when Patriarch Steel Veins took a deep breath and blurred into motion. In the blink of an eye, he was next to Bai Xiaochun, although he kept a good distance from him. Eyes flashing with incisive light, he looked at the other 3 devas and spoke in a sinister voice as cold as winter wind. Overboard? Chen Hichan, Bai Zhenchen, Li Shendao. Do you really think you can go and bully people from the Hall of Steel Veins anytime you like? My old pal Bai is exactly right. The Hall of Steel Veins slaughters enemies without count, and yet you sneak around trying to exterminate sects. Who could possibly stand for such a thing? Although Brother Bai hasn't yet been made an elder by the demigod patriarch, considering that he was a major general, and is a member of the Hall of Steel Veins, then that puts him under my protection. So, let's see who here today dares to do a thing to anyone from the Hall of Steel Veins. As the Diva Patriarch spoke, the cultivators from the Hall of Steel Veins unleashed murderous auras that formed something of a spell formation, locking down any paths of escape for Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Zhenchen. Bai Xiaochun's spirits were lifted even more, and it was the same with the river-defying sect. In contrast, the 3 devas were grumbling bitterly, and their expressions were extremely unsightly. All of a sudden, Bai Xiaochun realized that this was a great opportunity. If he made a move right now, then all of his allies would obviously support him. However, just when he was about to break into motion, the sky suddenly filled with intense rumbling sounds that surpassed heavenly thunder. The sky went dim and distorted. Spasms rolled out across the surface of the land. At the same time, a powerful blast of energy appeared, shoving Bai Xiaochun backward. The same energy hit Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Zhenchen, sending them flying backward by several hundred meters. As for the murderous aura being emitted by the Hall of Steel Veins, it winked out instantly. And yet, things weren't over yet. Shocking pressure began to weigh down from above, pressure that caused the faces of the devas to fall. The nascent soul cultivators present began to tremble, and anyone under that level felt like they were being strangled. Furthermore, the wills of all the devas were completely driven away down to the tiniest scrap as an enormous figure of light appeared up above. It appeared to be made of starlight, and was threatening without being angry. Large enough to prop up heaven and earth, it caused everyone who could see it to be shaken deeply. It appeared to be a middle-aged man, who was looking down on everyone present, heavenly bodies gleaming in his eyes. The fluctuations rolling off of him vastly surpassed those of a diva. They were demigod fluctuations, and were not being restrained in even the least bit. When all of the other 4 devas saw the figure of light, they clasped hands and bowed deeply. Greetings, Patriarch Starry Sky. They weren't the only ones to react in such a way. The nascent soul cultivators from the Hall of Steel Veins trembled as they offered formal greetings. Then, everyone else who didn't recognize the glowing figure, but heard the words of the other powerful experts, gasped and followed suit. Bai Xiaochun's breath caught in his throat, and he shivered inwardly. Obviously, this glowing figure of light was none other than the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect's most powerful expert, the demigod Patriarch. The demigod is stepping in. Although Bai Xiaochun was a bit nervous, he reminded himself that he had seen his fair share of demigods, and thus managed to suppress his anxiety. However, he put an expression of deep fear onto his face as he clasped hands in formal greeting. It only took moments for everyone on the battlefield to be bowing in reverence to Patriarch Starry Sky, as if he were the most eminent figure in all heaven and earth. No expression could be seen on his face as he looked over the crowd, ignoring Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Xiaochun. In fact, he even ignored the diva from the Hall of Steel Veins. Instead, he fixed his gaze on Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun had just suppressed his anxiety, only to have it flare up again. He immediately thought back to some ways that he had dealt with demigods back in the wildlands, and yet quickly realized that this was a totally different situation. Even as his anxiety mounted, and he scrambled to come up with new ideas, the figure of light looked away from him. Then, an ancient, profound voice rumbled out to fill the entire area. Let Bai Xiaochun be appointed as an elder in the Hall of Steel Veins. He shall be given an Elder's Command Medallion, an Immortal's Cave on the Blue Rainbow, and will select a date to make an official return to the sect. Henceforth, the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect has 6 devas. As his words echoed out with thunderous intensity, the cultivators from the Hall of Steel Veins became visibly excited. As for Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Xiaochun, their faces grew deathly pale, and they bowed their heads. They knew that, with the approval of the demigod Patriarch, there would be nothing they could do from preventing Bai Xiaochun and the river-defying sect from rising to prominence in the eastern Heavenspan River. If the Hall of Steel Veins was excited, there was almost no need to mention the river-defying sect. They were so swept up in the moment that they began to cheer out loud. As for Bai Xiaochun, he breathed a sigh of relief, and wondered why he had been so scared before. Who cares about demigods? I absorbed one of the Celestial's hairs. And I'm supposed to be scared of a demigod? My apprentice is the Hell Emperor, and my father-in-law is a demigod. And thus he continued to encourage himself, and muse excitedly about how perfectly he had fought back earlier. The demigod Patriarch gazed at Bai Xiaochun with a profound and enigmatic look before slowly fading away into nothing. He took Chen Hichan, Li Shendao and Bai Xiaochun along with him when he went, which was a good thing for them. If he hadn't, Bai Xiaochun wouldn't have let them leave unscathed. He had already been glaring at them menacingly before acquiring the open approval of the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. To see them fading away with the demigod Patriarch was a bit irritating. So stingy. It's not like I would actually kill them or something. However, he was so flushed with success that he didn't dwell on such negativity. After all, Zhao Tianzhao, Bai Lin, and the cultivators from the Hall of Steel Veins were all still present, and he needed to thank them. Patriarch Steel Veins wore a broad smile when he spoke, treating Bai Xiaochun, not with superiority, but as an equal. Bai Lin seemed to have endless sighs in his heart, and the truth was, he couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened back at the Great Wall. Zhao Tianzhao reacted similarly. Both men seemed to have been deeply affected by what Bai Xiaochun had accomplished, and both of them were determined to return to the sect and go directly into secluded meditation to work on their cultivation. Among the tens of thousands of other cultivators who had come, many were war buddies from the Great Wall. Some had also been Bai Xiaochun's direct subordinates. All of them were very excited to see him, and didn't hesitate to accept his invitation to stay in the river-defying sect to celebrate. The patriarchs of the river-defying sect were thrilled about what was happening, and threw a feast to thank everyone who had come to offer their aid. That night was like a dream for most of the disciples of the river-defying sect. Their nervousness from earlier became joy, and of course, their esteem for Bai Xiaochun grew even greater. At the same time, their anticipation for what was to come for the sect grew more intense. The patriarchs reacted similarly. It was as if an enormous weight had been lifted off their shoulders, and their faces were covered with smiles for the entire night. The following morning, the cultivators from the Hall of Steel Veins left. After seeing them off, Bai Xiaochun sighed, relieved that he had at long last settled all of the issues that the river-defying sect faced. He could well imagine how, in the coming days, the river-defying sect would be the #1 sect in the eastern Middle Reaches cultivation world of the Heavenspan River. From now on, the other 3 sects would be subsidiaries of the river-defying sect. But, it's still not enough, he thought. He glanced down at his bag of holding, and his eyes began to shine with determination. If the river-defying sect truly wanted stability, they couldn't just have a single diva. If one of the current patriarchs could become the sect's second diva, even if it was only the mortal Dao diva realm, then the river-defying sect could be considered truly stable in its position. After all, the demigod patriarch's dharmic decree had made clear that Bai Xiaochun would need to return to the starry sky Dao polarity sect soon. That meant that his time in the river-defying sect was limited. I can't wait too long before leaving, that wouldn't be good. Therefore, I need to make sure that one of the patriarchs becomes a diva before I leave. One of the reasons he was so confident in being able to make that happen was the rainbow spirit thistle he had acquired during a shakedown in the wildlands. 1. Considering his skill in the Tao of medicine, he was sure that, with the cooperation of the pill stream division, he could use that rainbow spirit thistle to concoct a diva pill. Diva pills were very rare and extremely difficult to concoct. Although he was confident that he could produce one, he didn't have enough ingredients to make multiple copies. As for which patriarch he wanted to become a diva, he decided not to worry about it. Although he would surely be able to give input, it was a sensitive subject, and therefore, the best thing would be to let the patriarchs decide among themselves. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he sent a message to Patriarch Spirit Stream and Patriarch Bloodstream, informing them of his plan. Then he went into his secluded meditation facilities to start working. The entire river-defying sect was abuzz with talk of Bai Xiaochun. As for Song Junwan, her position in the sect had already changed. In the past, people knew that she was close with Bai Xiaochun, and because of that, she had been treated differently. However, it hadn't been very obvious. But now, things were very different. Elders and patriarchs alike treated her with the utmost respect. In fact, everyone who had good relationships with Bai Xiaochun were being treated differently. Especially Li Qinghao. Since Bai Xiaochun was effectively the ultimate leader of the sect now, and Li Qinghao was his uncle, that put him in a very high position. In fact, after some discussion, the patriarchs agreed that when the time came, Li Qinghao would be the next sect leader. Shortly after that, the patriarchs got word from Bai Xiaochun that he planned to concoct a diva pill, which would make it highly likely that one of the half-diva patriarchs would finally be able to break out from the great circle of the nascent soul stage. Of course, the patriarchs were both delighted and deeply thankful. Their first thought was to give the honor to Li Qinghao. Unfortunately, his cultivation base was not in the great circle, and they were worried that it would take him too long to get there. They urgently needed a diva patriarch in place in the sect, and therefore, after discussion with Li Qinghao himself, they decided that Patriarch Spirit Stream would be the one to take the pill. After all, Patriarch Spirit Stream had lived for many, many years, even longer than Patriarch Bloodstream, whose cultivation base was at the same level as his. Reaching the diva realm would give him significant longevity, and Patriarch Spirit Stream had his secret magic that further increased longevity. Even Patriarch Bloodstream had to admit that if he himself became a diva, he would eventually perish, whereas Patriarch Spirit Stream could potentially live for much longer. Naturally, having Patriarch Spirit Stream as the diva in the sect would be the most beneficial. Furthermore, with one diva permanently in the sect, it would make it easier for others to reach that level. As the patriarchs discussed all of these matters, Bai Xiaochun was in his secluded meditation facilities doing the initial work in preparation to concoct the diva pill. The sect had acquired the formula long ago, but had never possessed the primary ingredient, and had thus been unable to concoct it. Bai Xiaochun's work caused the entire sect to fill with a lovely, sweet fragrance. Bruiser particularly liked the smell, and plopped himself down in front of Bai Xiaochun's secluded meditation chamber to breathe it in. All spirit beasts benefited from it, and even cultivators would experience a certain refinement of their cultivation bases by breathing it in. This unexpected phenomenon caused everyone in the river-defying sect to be in even further awe of Bai Xiaochun. However, the aroma didn't last for long, as Bai Xiaochun emerged from seclusion 7 days later. He immediately sent word to the patriarchs, whereupon the Pillstream division sent over a few dozen Grandmaster apothecaries, as well as Li Qinghao, to help Bai Xiaochun in his work. They immediately set up a medicinal spell formation which allowed Bai Xiaochun to begin the final stages of his work. His concocting session lasted for an entire month. Unfortunately, he met with failure in each attempt, losing some of his primary ingredient every time. He was starting to get anxious, but managed to suppress his nervousness and took the opportunity to learn from every mistake. As the saying goes, everything comes to him who waits. It was on his 7th attempt that he succeeded, just when he ran out of ingredients. On that day, illusory thunder crackled and a spirit fragrance filled the entire sect, causing a mist to spring up. The entire river-defying sect looked like a celestial paradise as a result. I finally did it. Bai Xiaochun was a bit gaunt, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. As his laughter rang out, the patriarchs hurried over to find him holding a white, glowing medicinal pill. A single glance at that pill caused deep desire to rise up in the hearts of the patriarchs. All of them could sense how the pill almost seemed fused with the world around it. After a long moment, the patriarchs managed to suppress their feelings. A very serious expression could be seen on the face of Patriarch Spirit Stream as he accepted the pill. He nodded at Bai Xiaochun, clasped hands and bowed deeply to the other patriarchs and went into secluded meditation. The pressure he faced was immense. After all, he only had one diva pill and therefore, only had one chance to succeed. Bai Xiaochun had finally resolved all of the crises facing the river-defying sect. He himself was now a diva patriarch of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, and had put the river-defying sect in the position of being the absolute overlord of the Middle Reaches cultivation world. On top of that, he had successfully concocted a diva pill for the extremely long-lived Patriarch Spirit Stream, giving him a very good chance of reaching the diva realm. Bai Xiaochun was very satisfied with everything. At the moment, he stood outside of his immortals cave, petting Bruiser's head and looking around at the sect. The disciples were still busy with the renovation work, and were in very high spirits. Feeling more than wonderful, he flicked his sleeve, stuck his chin up and murmured, "I'm happy. Everybody's happy. I'm strong. The sect is strong. Bruiser, you know I'm the kind of person who likes the limelight. Who could ever have imagined that fate would lead me here, a patriarch at such a young age? I'm not old at all." He shook his head and sighed, feeling more proud of himself than ever. 1. I never wanted to go back to the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, but as you saw, the demigod patriarch personally asked me to go. What a headache. I'm also an elder in the Hall of Steel Veins, which is a really rare thing. I guess I have no choice in the matter. All my old friends and war buddies are there. I really just have to accept my status. What do you think, Bruiser? Why am I just such a genius? A scowl of helplessness slowly spread out across his face. Bruiser blinked a few times and looked around, only to find that they were alone, prompting him to snort quietly. After all, Bai Xiaochun usually only acted depressed like this when he knew people were around to see him. When Bai Xiaochun saw the reaction he was getting, he cleared his throat and then bopped Bruiser on the head. Play along, he said with a glare. You know what that means? From now on, whenever you hear me talking like this, you need to play along. That'll make me like you even more, alright? At first Bruiser whimpered, but then he quickly changed his expression to match Bai Xiaochun's. When Bai Xiaochun saw how depressed he looked, he frowned and added a few more words. No, that's not the right expression. Listen, when you hear me say things like I just said, you need to look excited. Sigh deeply and with meaning. Make it seem like you're resigning yourself to a truly bitter fate. After receiving a few more pointers, Bruiser finally got the right expression onto his face. With that, Bai Xiaochun started over with his act, and Bruiser played along. Ha ha ha, great job, Bruiser. Alright, come along with Dad as I take a walk. Remember, when you hear me say those things, put that expression on your face immediately. In very high spirits, Bai Xiaochun led Bruiser on a stroll through the sect. Wherever they went, the people they encountered would offer respectful formal greetings. Whenever there was a big enough of a crowd, Bai Xiaochun would sigh and monologue a bit. The disciples who didn't know much about him would be shocked. The ones who knew him, though, would simply sigh. This was not their first time seeing him act in a way like this. Bruiser played along perfectly, and worked very hard at it. As Bai Xiaochun sighed, he would wail and wrap himself around Bai Xiaochun's leg, eyes shining with a look of comfort. It was as if he were saying to Bai Xiaochun, It's simply your fate to be such a genius. Those who saw this happening were shocked, and many a strange expression could be seen. As for Bai Xiaochun, his delight mounted, and he dragged Bruiser from one place to another for an entire day. The more people who called out greetings to him as a patriarch, the more strange expressions could be seen. How come the patriarch is acting so strange? Maybe all devas are like this? Oh, you guys have no idea. Bai Xiaochun, Patriarch Bai was always like this. You just need to get used to it, that's all. Talk like that followed Bai Xiaochun wherever he went in the sect. The next day, his enthusiasm had not yet waned, and the same scene played out again. He went to see Beihan Lai 3 times, nearly driving him mad. Beihan Lai would always greet him with the utmost respect, and then be forced to listen to Bai Xiaochun's endless sighs. On the second day, Beihan Lai chose to go into secluded meditation. Bai Xiaochun was a bit saddened by that, but then he went to find Shangguan Tianyu. In fact, he went to see all of the people he knew in the Spirit Stream division. After that, he went to the Bloodstream division. It was in that fashion that 3 whole days passed, until everyone in the river-defying sect came to fully understand Bai Xiaochun's personality. Wry smiles could be seen everywhere, and many people began to avoid him as soon as they saw him off in the distance. After all, he didn't seem anything like a diva patriarch in person. Bai Xiaochun did not get discouraged. Actually, he became more focused. In fact, he had just decided to go look into the specifics of why Beihan Lai was in secluded meditation when Song Junwan finally had enough. Rushing over angrily, she rebuked him up and down until he finally rubbed his nose and gave up on acting like a patriarch. All I was doing was sighing and saying a few things. Whatever. I guess if I'm not even allowed to sigh, I'll just go into secluded meditation. After all, he would be in the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect soon, and nobody there would care if he went around sighing. Filled with aspirations for what was to come, he went into meditation. For one thing, he needed to wait until Patriarch Spirit Stream achieved his breakthrough. And also, he had still not yet stabilized his cultivation base after his recent breakthrough. And then there was the Undying Codex. Having mastered the Undying Bones, and having achieved a breakthrough, he was now in the position to break through the 4th shackle of the human body. Once that happened, he knew that his fleshly body power would increase. Most importantly, he would be able to cultivate the final part of the Undying Codex. The Undying Blood. The Undying Blood is the true essence of the Undying Codex. If I succeed with that, I won't necessarily be truly undying, but I definitely won't be dying anytime soon. With that thought on his mind, he got to work. After sitting down cross-legged, he cast his senses inward to the shocking spiritual power of heaven and earth that flowed through him constantly. It almost made him feel as if he were a part of the world around him. Every move he made could be filled with heavenly might, and every breath he took could rumble like thunder. So this is what it's like to be a diva. It's totally different from the nascent soul stage. A complete transformation. The more he probed his cultivation base, the more excited he got. Furthermore, he could tell that after becoming a diva, his longevity had grown vastly more vigorous. I wonder if I could live for 5,000 years now? The thought excited him, and he began to do some calculations, but was soon disappointed to realize that he probably couldn't reach 5,000. I'm still very far away from my goal of being able to live forever. After examining his cultivation base for a bit longer, he sank into a trance and began to work on his fleshly body power. Cracking sounds could be heard inside of him, which came from his bones. The power of his chi and blood erupted out, causing the air in his secluded meditation chamber to twist and distort as a vortex sprang up around him. Based on the fluctuations, Bai Xiaochun was sure that he could sense the 4th shackle. It felt much the same as the previous 3 shackles. Although the sensation wasn't particularly clear, he was sure that something like an enormous mountain was weighing down on him with profound heaviness. All of a sudden, he felt the impulse to smash into that mountain. Eyes widening, he shouted, "It's time to break the 4th shackle." 1. I'm not quite sure if it's supposed to be a play on words or not, but the word for patriarch in Chinese has the character old in it. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.